Yeah, I think we have two really crazy strong cards coming to Marvel Snap this month. We finally here got the official reveals for the January season, the Dragons season. And in this video, we're going to rate every card this month from 1 to 4 stars and also rank them from best to worst. And boy, I'm going to have a hard time deciding between my top two because I think we have, like I said, two absolutely nutty cards this time around. The first of which right here behind me is Shou-Lao the Undying, the new season pass card. This is a 5/8 with on reveal, give the last character you played +3 power for each turn you played 2 or more cards. Which this one's been changed a little bit since we saw the data mined version initially. That was a 5/10 that gave +2. So it had a higher base, but not as much reach on its buff. But I think this is a crazy strong upgrade to this card. Putting more power into the buff, I think ultimately will actually be more of a net gain, because I think you'll often get more than 2 turns of buffs, which means, you know, at 1 extra power per turn with this change, you know, I think you're looking at basically a lot more raw stat output here. Potentially like 2 extra points versus that other version, but also putting that buff on a key target can magnify the value of that buff even further. All those classic examples we talk about, like, you know, a Captain Carter getting 9 or even 12 power from a Shou-Lao the Undying is absolutely absurd. A Scarlet Spider getting 6 power is actually nuts, but getting 9 or 12 power is absolutely insane, right? Like being able to double or in some cases even triple the buff here on Shou-Lao is just absolutely absurd. On top of that, like the 5/8 stat line too, pretty compelling in its own right. Like, and you're able to spread that power out really nicely, right? Like put something big down and then Shou-Lao somewhere else. Like you're actually really contesting multiple spots nicely. On top of that, you actually have some real like decision making. You could almost bait the opponent where it's like, hey, they played an Iron Man on turn 5. They're going to play Shou-Lao on turn 6 and buff that Iron Man. But in reality, like you play a 1-drop alongside your Shou-Lao and completely misdirect them and put power in places they totally didn't expect it. So basically it's got like crazy big power output in total. I think very easily getting 9, sometimes even 12 extra power out of this makes this like a 17 or 20 power card, not counting those magnifications like we talked about. So crazy power output. It's got surprise factor where it's like, man, the opponent just does not really know what you're going to do with this or where that power is going to go. It's actually got some flexibility when it comes to positioning and so on. I think it's actually good in a variety of decks. Like obviously things like Athena decks might jump out at you where you're, you know, playing 2 cards per turn with a Athena deck. That's really natural. Hey, I'm going to just plop my Shou-Lao Undying into my Athena deck. Probably makes sense. Probably looks pretty good if you're already doing that sort of thing. Anyway, you've also got cards like Kitty Pride, which is just automatically really sensible where you're playing a Kitty every turn alongside, you know, whatever else fills your curve. And Kitty actually is a kind of a cool card to get buff for Shou-Lao, right? Like you can start to make like a dual threat there with that Kitty, or again, have some key target in your deck. With Athena, there's also like the end of turn sort of thing where, you know, there's good end of turn cards like Human Torch First Steps is a crazy buff recipient for something like Shou-Lao the Undying if you want to squeeze it into Athena in turn deck. I think, you know, Kitty Pride, Angela decks. There's like 17 different ways I can go with this card. Any deck that has an excuse to run a Captain Carter or a Scarlet Spider, like a Scarlet Spider Activate deck or something, right? Like, it's really like the sky's the limit on the number of things this can really enable. And the crazy thing is any deck that's just able to play 2 cards like twice might just be worth it anyway. Like, you know, 5/8 that gives a +6 or especially like a +9 buff is just really big. So, you know, Thanos decks that are just playing out some stones, any deck that's just playing a handful of 1-drops that can weave in nicely, right? I think there's a lot of potential shells for this where it's good and it's just like a really nice split power output kind of card. And then I think there's going to be a few specific shells where this is like game breakingly strong because this buff can go crazy far, right? Like this buff hitting the right target is just like instant lane winning kind of play. Maybe even if, you know, like with Scarlet Spider being able to spread those stats, like, you know, it's 2 lane winning kind of play. So I think there's just some real possibilities here for this. Now, I don't think this card's ever going to activate for turn 1. I don't think it'll run Wasp to get like a turn 1. You could, but it'd be hard to keep up with enough cards. But, even starting on turn 2, it's becoming possible for Shou-Lao. That said, I think a lot of decks will still want to play their natural turn 2 play, especially stuff like Merlin that's really good at enabling the Shou-Lao later. But then basically turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, and really even turn 6, because I think this will count itself if played on turn 6, because like the cards will have already been played out. So, you're talking about 4 turns there where it's not crazy to activate your Shou-Lao. Now, you won't always hit every turn. The curve won't always line up. So, it's probably more safe to say 2 or 3. But I still, like I said, 3 in particular, that's some crazy numbers. So in other words, don't really think the conditionality here is much of a problem, particularly because the decks that really, really specifically want to utilize this will work towards that to make sure it's hitting 3+ times. I think other decks will still kind of be able to make it work. So what I'm getting at here is that to me, Shou-Lao the Undying looks really, really strong. I think this buff is so significant and has such key potential targets. We're going to see this guy a lot, and I think this could be one of the best 5 drops maybe Marvel Snap has ever seen. Is that crazy to say? 5's kind of historically not been the strongest energy cost. So yeah, I think that's kind of reasonable. My take right now is this card is very good. So next up, moving on to Dragon of the Moon. I think this is going to be the like premium season pass. Is that what it's called? I can never remember the names of this stuff. But this is a 3/2 with on reveal, steal 1 power from even costed cards in all hands, which is this kind of a cool idea here with some odd and even references in Marvel Snap. But, if your opponent has, let's say 2 to 3 cards in hand on turn 3 that are even costed, and you maybe have 1 or 2 yourself because perhaps you're like running a Luke Cage and you don't care that your cards get afflicted or whatever. Then this could, jump up, let's say 5 or 6 power and become a 3/7 or a 3/8, which is, above rate for a 3-drop. Also keep in mind, it's got that nice upside of, like a Scorpion, for instance, where your opponent now has some debuff stuff in hand and they're losing those stats. If they play a couple of those cards out, your net exchange here on the Dragon of the Moon might be, a 10 power net gain. And then, of course, if you have affliction synergies, if you're running an Ajax, if you're running an Abomination in your high Evo deck, right, there could be additional ways for you to benefit from those afflictions on top, of course, of the base affliction benefit. Or if you hit your opponent's Captain Carter or Scarlet Spider, for my classic examples, or their Iron Man, then, your afflictions count even more. So all of that sounds good. I think the question for this card is just going to be like, how much better is it than alternatives in those kinds of decks that might care about it? So, an affliction deck, is this better than a Scorpion? Is this better than a Cassandra Nova? Because those live in similar sorts of spaces, right? Like either I'm afflicting the hand with Scorpion or I'm making a big afflicted 3-drop with Cassandra Nova, right? Does it do it better than those? I'm like a little soft on that. Now, there are ways that you could juice this up even further. I think Master Mold has been a well-cited example here where you play like a Master Mold on turn 2, Dragon of the Moon on turn 3. Your opponent is pretty much guaranteed to have some extra Sentinels in hand, thereby giving this, a couple extra points of power. Then the question becomes like, is this good enough to really encourage like a Master Mold build? Like, do you want to run a bad card in order to make a mediocre card a little bit better? Can like a Ronin deck come together around Dragon of the Moon? Can you do stuff with like even a Maximus to give them even more cards in hand where, maybe they catch an extra even card because of that, right? Are there ways to make that cohesive deck worth it? Like we've seen some Master Mold Ronin stuff do okay in the past, I think with like Malekith builds in particular, before that's worked. This is maybe an okay Malekith card, but not an insane one. So I wouldn't write that off, right? I think that's definitely possible, giving an extra tool to that kind of archetype. I think this is maybe an extra tool for an affliction deck, but again, I'm not really sold on its fit there. It's kind of crowded at the 3 slot already. This might be better as a 2 to compete against Scorpion there, but then you're kind of doing the same thing again. But what I'm getting at is I don't really know if this is incrementally beneficial enough to those decks to like change their fate in the meta. I don't think this card's like so good that those get a really big boost and become the thing. I can't see Master Mold being meta because of Dragon of the Moon. So in other words, it's like a really niche, fine tool probably, but one that maybe demands either too much support or too niche of a deck demand that it really becomes, you know, a powerful tool. It becomes a great card or anything like that. I think it might need some help to really get to that level. Like, you'd really have to push the stats and make this pretty darn strong in order for those decks to get the boost they needed. Like, does this need to start as a 3-4 or something to be that incentive? Maybe so. So I think this is left in a fine spot. I don't think it's a bad card by any means. I just don't think it's strong enough to really take that next step. So moving on here to Lockheed. This is a 2/1 end of turn. If you played a 1-cost card this turn, that can be anywhere, by the way, it doesn't say here, afflict an enemy card here with -2 power. So this is basically a way to get some afflictions. I guess he's spitting fireballs over at the opponent every turn, as long as you're playing your Kitty Pryde. In essence, you know, Lockheed is friends with Kitty Pryde, as I understand. It doesn't have to be Kitty Pryde, might be the prime example, as we've talked about with things like Shou-Lao, where you're just chaining that Kitty Pryde turn after turn, and Lockheed becomes a sort of Angela of sorts, where it doesn't really matter where the Kitty Pryde is played, but you're getting that power scaling every turn just by playing your 1-drop. Could go next to an Angela, could be independent, but basically, as long as there's something to hit, you're going to get that 2 power affliction. And, you know, if you're playing this on turn 2 in particular, you're probably going to be hitting with turn 3 first off for your 1-drop. Like, of course, some discounts and stuff. You could start earlier than turn 2, but probably turn 3, 4, 5, and 6 is when you would expect to hit on your Lockheed, which, of course, that is 5 turns. What did I say? 3, 4, 5, and 6. No, that's 4 turns. I know how to count, guys. That's 4 turns or -8 power given to the opponent, which makes this kind of a 2/9 in essence of total output, which is good. That's like competitive. Now, you know, it is one that demands, again, like a little bit of a deck build around. Like, it's a deck that's going to have to want to play 1-drops consistently. So if you're trying to play stuff on curve, you're just not going to want a Lockheed, right? You're going to want that Kitty Pryde, maybe the Shou-Lao, maybe Thanos. Again, the same sorts of things. We've got plenty of reasons to play 1-drops to weave this in. And then the question kind of becomes, is it good enough just for that affliction disruption, or do you need an extra layer of synergy? Do you need some affliction stuff to go with it, right? Do you need an Ajax? Do you need all that to make it worth it for Lockheed, or is just the numbers for numbers themselves worth it? I don't know. I actually think it's probably fine to use this as sort of an Angela that has like more upside or more scaling in some ways. You know, of course, it's just once per turn, and you know, it's not multiple cards per turn, something like Angela. But there's this little niche we've seen before with Thena in particular as an end of turn card, with Lockheed as an end of turn card. Maybe there's some kind of like end of turn Invisible Woman first steps deck that kind of weaves in a Kitty Pryde or some more 1-drops, because those also run stuff like, you know, sometimes Hydra Bob and so on. Maybe there's something there for Lockheed where just the fact that it's an end of turn card has some bonuses that it can play off of as well. But you know, it's just like another little bit of a demand built into that deck, which doesn't always necessarily want too many demands. And the Athena is particularly good at just kind of going off all at once, as opposed to like turn by turn, whereas this is a card that kind of needs to go turn by turn. I mean, I guess it still could pop off all at once at the end. It's just -2 power per hit. So I mean, I guess he doesn't need to be turn by turn if it's in the first step stack. You can just hit for -8 all at once at the end. So yeah, maybe that's actually fine. So it's just then, like, are you willing to run enough 1-drops in that deck, or play a 1-drop on the final turn too, is kind of an ask. Because if you're playing like Athena, Havoc, Lockheed, where's the 1-drop coming in, right? So it's an ask, but it's not a big ask, I guess. I'm talking myself into this kind of as we go. So basically, I think a pretty okay alternative in those sorts of shells that has the end of turn hook, that has the Kitty Pryde hook, and maybe that's enough for this to just get over the hump. But again, I don't think anything crazy, probably just an option. So moving on here to Lin Lie Iron Fist. This is a 2/2 with on reveal, add the Sword of Fushi to another location, and the sword here is a 2/2 with ongoing. If Lin Lie Iron Fist is here, he has 7 power. So this is kind of a Sam Wilson Captain America style card of sorts, right? Where you've got something on board and you need to like connect the two things to get some power. But instead of doing it turn by turn with a shield where you're bouncing it around a lot, this is kind of a one-time ask where you want to keep them together at the end. And Lin Lie jumps up to 9 power, and the sword, of course, remains 2, or a total output of 11 power for a 2-drop, which 11 power for 2-drop, that's big. It's not like crazy big, but it's really solid. The challenge, I guess, right, is getting them together. Unlike Sam Wilson, where that's all handled within the card itself, this time around you're going to need some outside help in order to get the Lin Lie moved over to the sword, or vice versa. So, you're going to have to play your Ghost Spider or something in order to do that. Even stuff that's like more random, like, if you wanted to use an Aranya to move your Lin Lie, you wouldn't know for sure it was going to, right? You couldn't use an Iron Fist either reliably. I mean, I guess unless you filled out a location or something to kind of force the sword's location. But if you just like play this organically on turn 2, Aranya is not a good hit. You would need something that's a follow-up like the Ghost Spider, which we do have more and more of those. Obviously a Madam Web is not a hard ask either. Just play a Madam Web, drop this down, move it over. Then the question becomes, though, like, if you're committing a lot of those move resources, if you're running a Madam Web, if you're running a Ghost Spider, that means obviously you're going to want your deck to have some move payoffs, because you're not just going to go all in on that. So you start building a move deck in essence. And then the question becomes to me is like, well, is Lin Lie the best move payoff, or, should I go a different direction? Like, am I just better off with the Torch, better off with the Vulture, better off with whatever, right? As a payoff. I like that this only demands 1 move in order to become like pretty big. You get +7 all at once after 1 move. And you also, you do have 4 power to baseline as well, which that admittedly has, that's not bad at a base. Also, sometimes filling locations can have its own value and upside. So to me, it's like kind of landing right in the middle there, where maybe because it only demands 1 move to be great, maybe that's fine, right? Maybe that's okay. And you have a deck that doesn't need as much, or has more of those movers open to your other big move scalers, right? So this just kind of gets that 1 freebie randomly, catches a Heimdall, catches a Ghost Spider, whatever, and you got your 11 power card for only 2. That might be just fine. So I think it's okay. I think you could see some move builds that go for like more kind of consistency almost, or tempo, as opposed to like crazy pop-offs where they try to hit, 1 super big torch. Maybe you just go for honest numbers instead. It does make sense to me there. I will also say another angle to look at this card might be something like an Aurora deck. This is basically 2 keywords for Aurora in 1 card. Which is nice. So, you just get an ongoing and get an on reveal for 1 for only 2. This suddenly becomes 2/8 in total power for Aurora. And if you still could somehow move them together, if your deck's somehow doing that, then hey, even more bonus, right? So I don't know. We're going to see another card later too with Shang-Chi that's kind of got some Aurora vibes, because you're just getting 2 keywords in 1. So that's always something to keep in mind. I mean, I guess there are technically ongoing synergies here too. I don't think this would even be totally crazy in like an ongoing deck that's just looking to get some good 2-drops. We often see like armor in that slot, which is like fine, but maybe you don't need it. If you're running like Madam Web and Lin Lie in an ongoing package, that'd be a thing where catching a Spectrum buff on your Madam Web and your sword suddenly makes it worth it. Maybe, not crazy, right? So few little like side angles to consider, and then, just like straight up more move stuff might be the more obvious angle. But so the numbers here are just big enough, and they just require kind of 1 activation of sorts. 1 move is all it takes. That gives me some faith that this card's got some oomph. I don't think it's nuts, but I think it's pretty good. Now, speaking of cards that have some oomph, this is Fang Foom. This is super exciting to see a character I actually know. As a casual Marvel enjoyer, always nice to see those these days in Marvel Snap. This is a 7/12 with on reveal, gain the power of front row enemy cards here, which this is just potentially insane numbers, right? Like just single-handedly basically flipping locations all on its own, where this could easily gain 10, 15, 20 or more power. I was thinking like playing this into like crazy Black Panthers is kind of hilarious. Like your opponent does the Black Panther Arnim Zola thing. Imagine if you Fang Foomed into Arnim Zola and you just like gained that insane Black Panther power, right? So like, this is gonna be 100 power card, right? You just don't know. This thing could be absolutely totally insanely cracked, and it creates this kind of like check of sorts on the opponent where it's like, hey, you have to beat me with your back row cards, right? It's like you have to beat 12 basically with your back row cards, and that's not even accounting for other things that might be in the Fang Foom location as well. But like, it's just kind of a thing that you expect to come down and just guaranteed solo a spot in so many scenarios and games. Like that doesn't always happen because Captain Carter decks, for instance, might have a ton of power in the back two spots, but so many decks might only have one big thing, two things, maybe a third thing, but they're all kind of medium sized. And then Fang Foom has that 12 power head start. When you combine that with, say, 5 and 6 power in the first and second spot, it's like boom, that third card has no way on average to contest that, right? So clearly an insane powerhouse. The challenge obviously is that this is a 7 cost card. So what does this get played in, right? Well, we've seen ramp decks that can utilize 7 cost cards fairly effectively, just because you play Luna Snow or whatever, you got 7 energy on turn 3. You play Electro Blink, you got turn 3 on turn 6. You got 7 energy on turn 6 after your Electro Blink, and like Fang Foom, totally playable as the final bomb in that kind of deck where you just like build up one big spot and then you Fang Foom somewhere else. He solos it and you feel good to go. We see like Galactus First Steps kind of do that same sort of thing where, it's enough to usually like solo a location more or less if it gets up to 18, 20 or whatever, right? But that one is like, it shows the opponent. That one they have this sense of impending doom, but they kind of see the math, right? With Fang Foom, like they might know it's coming, but you also might not expect it necessarily, right? Like it's a hidden value. It's not showing the opponent literally every turn, hey, you're about to get foomed. So the surprise factor there, even if it's like kind of expected because it's in deck lists, like it's still, it's hard to solve around basically. I mean, not literally hard to solve because you'll know the numbers, but you just may not have the numbers to answer it because it is such a crazy big number when it slams down. So beyond that, I think the perhaps more powerful and more obvious answer than ramp, even though I think it's good in ramp, and we've particularly seen some like chamber ramp decks and stuff lately find success, probably going to be great in that shell. Even beyond that though is Hella decks. And I'm somewhat sad to say that right now on Untapped, Hella decks are the #1 deck, the highest cube rate deck right now post Infinite on Untapped over the last week. Or the latest patch is a Hella deck that currently has 2 7-drops in it, Scar and Weapon H. And I'll tell you right now, Fang Foom is absolutely better than both of those in the best deck in the game right now, which to me just says, hey, Fang Foom is going to be one of the best cards in one of the best decks in the game. That is absolutely, obviously, just an incredible recipe for success, because he's already as big as Scar and basically as big as Weapon H. Now those do have other benefits, of course, because of the discounting stuff, like they're more easily played, but I think Hella decks will absolutely be able to make space for Fang Foom in particular, because like Weapon H, although he can get discounted in Hella decks from like Corvus Glaive and Sif and Gambit and stuff, he doesn't get resurrected back off Hella. So having one extra card, like maybe you trade out the Scar, which can get resurrected by Hella, put in the Fang Foom instead, like, man, that's just going to be, instead of a 12 power Scar, you're going to have a 30 power Fang Foom sometimes, which is just certainly going to win off those Hella bombs. So yeah, in essence, I don't think this is like as consistently widespread of something as we'll see as like Shou-Lao. Like I think a lot of decks can run that. It's going to be in a lot of shells. Fang Foom is definitely going to be more narrow in its deck utilization just because 7 cost does, it's a demand. But I think the decks that run it, it's going to feel like an absolute powerhouse. It's going to feel like a really big swingy sort of play. Perhaps there's some risk that it's like too all in, but I think those decks can play around that by just getting really strong elsewhere, preloading a chamber, just overwhelming on big stuff with the Electro Blink package and so on. That this is going to feel good. And, there's some risk too, like if it hits too early, if like, you Electro Blink into it, you might only hit your opponent's 3 power card or whatever. And Fang Foom only goes up to 15. But then you say to yourself, well, wait a minute, I just turned my Electro into a 15 power card. I'm still not mad. In other words, like the low rolls aren't that low and the high rolls are completely insane. So I do think Fang Foom looks really strong. So moving on here to Shang-Chi, Master of the Rings. Everybody always wanted another Shang-Chi. I think this one will perhaps be a little less annoying than the past for many folks. This is a 3-5, which this was a 3-4, I believe, when we saw it initially in the Datamined version. So a little bit of a buff. It has game start. The 10 rings starts in your hand, and then on reveal, unlock their potential. So basically, you're going to get the top version of this 10 rings card in your opening hand. That's a 2-1 that reads, on reveal, give one of your other cards here +1 power, which is very weak, to be clear. Like a 2-1 that just gives +1 power in the same spot, incredibly weak. Even if your Captain Carter's there or whatever, right? Like, just not really a very good output for 2 mana. But once it's unlocked, the potential, that is, once you've played Shang-Chi and this becomes nuts, and I believe that will happen whether it's in play already or in hand. You might play it out on 2, but you might just want to wait. You may not have to. But having it down on turn 2 is really good for Shang-Chi on turn 3, because there's an end of turn, as you can read, give your other cards here +1 power. So immediately having that ready to go on turn 3, as soon as you play your Shang-Chi, you can play the Shang-Chi on top of the 10 rings and immediately start realizing that that end of turn buff. Also, the 10 rings itself seems to get a buff when you unlock it, probably just to help indicate. I guess the logo is also a little different. The rings come together as well to help indicate which is which. That is a really strong card. Like, that is, +3 basically per turn as soon as you fill up a location. You might not want to fill up the location like too soon, but if you play on turn 1, you play 10 rings on 2, you play Shang-Chi on 3, you're off to a crazy start in that location, right? Like, already getting +2 per turn as soon as turn 3. And then, turn 4, I think you could probably lock in, because like, you're going to get so much power there that outside of like a Shadow King, it's going to be so insanely difficult for your opponent to contest. Then you kind of save your final 2 turns to go elsewhere, while the 10 rings is just farming 3 points per turn. So, often that would be, a 2-2 to base. And then on turn 3, you get +2. So you're already at 4 power. And then every turn thereafter, you're getting an additional 3 power if you want. So you go from 4 to 7 on turn 4 to 10 on turn 5 to 13 power on turn 6. Total output for a 2-cost card, assuming I did all that math right, not to mention Shang-Chi, was also a 3-5, which feels pretty solid to tempo out as well. So, you're talking about a lot of total power here, basically, across these 2 things. And obviously, if you have any cards that do benefit from that repeat buffing, Captain Carter, Scarlet Spider goes down on turn 4. You get the idea. I love having 2 examples that I never deviate from. Then you can again multiply those stat buffs even further. So I think that's really cool. Now, I am making an assumption here that the 10 rings starting in your hand does not take up like a normal card draws slot. Like, I don't think you're losing a draw in order to get the 10 rings. Like, I think it's going to be an extra card in your opening hand. If you lose a card to get the 10 rings, that would be pretty tough. That would be an enormous downside. I don't think they would do that. I think they're just going to give you this one as a bonus, which that is nice. That doesn't thin your deck necessarily, because, you still have the same number of normal cards in your deck. Like, Shang-Chi will still be there or whatever. But it's just like a curve filler sometimes, like to make sure you have enough stuff, basically. So that's good. We've talked about Aurora a little bit already. Like, if you upgrade your 10 rings, that's an end of turn. You've got Shang-Chi's and on reveal. Like, there's a couple keywords across a couple bodies, which could be nice for an Aurora style package, for instance. This is also an end of turn effect, like we talked about with, Invisible Woman First Steps, Fantastic-Car, etc. Like, if you hit Shang-Chi, like, this could be a pretty nutty in turn to duplicate with those effects. So, some synergies there. I don't know if it'd totally be worth it, because, occasionally you will miss the Shang-Chi. You have to draw the Shang-Chi. Like, this is the big, butt kind of hanging over this entire conversation. Games you don't draw Shang-Chi, man, 10 rings kind of sucks, but it's also kind of free. That's the other side of it, right? Is like, you don't have to play it. If it's an extra card in your opening hand, it's like, well, it's no different than just not having the 10 rings, right? So I'm a little torn there, because it's like, well, is Shang-Chi worth it, for basically 75% of games? But also, I'll say, like, Shang-Chi getting played on turn 6 is way worse than Shang-Chi getting played on turn 3. So, like, a Shang-Chi drawn off curve, if you draw him too late or whatever, it's kind of too late for the 10 rings to really feel worth it. You know, yeah, I guess there's still like a 2-5 if you hit 3 cards on that final turn or whatever, but it's not like nuts anymore. It's just okay. You had to play like a 3-5 and a 2-5, you know, and it's like, not over the moon about that development. So I don't know. It's not like punishing you, but at the same time, like the timing windows are really tight on this to feel great. I feel like it could be pushed just a little further so that when you don't hit that timing right, you know, when things don't line up, it doesn't feel like such a weak development maybe. Even on turn 5, I don't think this is like a disaster play, but it's not great if you like play these out together on turn 5 or whatever. So I don't know, man. I think it's good. I think there's enough hooks here for some decks to find something to like. End of turn scaling, Aurora stuff, just like bodies on board, tempo, the extra card in hand, you know, like is a Wiccan deck gonna play this just so that they have a 2-drop guaranteed that's not a domino that kills your draw, right? Like that alone might actually just be a reason to play Shang-Chi, is like, hey, domino steals a draw from me. If 10 rings doesn't steal a draw, Wiccan deck's gonna be like, oh yeah, I just always have a 2-drop and still have my chance to draw Wiccan fully, because you know, domino's now sometimes a Wiccan instead of a domino or whatever, right? So maybe that's enough of an angle right there for Shang-Chi, because you know, this is a solid turn 3 play into Wiccan as well. That might be enough. So again, I think this card's good, not absolutely mind-bogglingly crazy to me, but probably good and has a few angles. So next up here is a collectible skill, the Majestic Wingbeat. This is 1 energy with on reveal, give the leftmost card in your hand +2 power, and if it's 5 cost or higher, give it -1 cost as well. So you can kind of spend 1 early in order to cheat out something a little bit bigger, as long as it is a big thing, but also, you know, give it some extra power, which the first thing that came to mind for me here was like Agatha. She's always the leftmost card in your hand. This could be a way to sometimes cheat out your Agatha a little sooner. It certainly doesn't feel better than like Redshift. You know, I think I'd rather just have Redshift to just get her out of hand immediately instead of having the discount. You could do stuff like Majestic Wingbeat and High Evo Shocker to both discount your Agatha. But again, it's like, man, it's just Redshift and Lady Sif and stuff. We have tools that do that way more effectively. So I'm not really sold on that side of it. So then I'm thinking about this more from like a hand buff aspect, you know, the Captain Carters, the Scarlet Spiders, the Iron Mans, where that +2 power can go a little bit further, and it's just another way to get some big numbers. Thinking about Zombie Galacti a little bit, which, you know, can be the kind of card that late in the game particularly does sort of filter its way down to the left side of your hand as you're playing out all the smaller stuff, and it's stuck there, just keeps moving further and further over. You know, maybe on turn 5 or something, you're able to play a Majestic Wingbeat that fairly consistently hits your Zombie Galacti, especially with like a Wong down. You know, you could give +4 to your Zombie Galacti right off the bat and discount it so you can do some sneaky stuff, or play it out organically on turn 6. Like a few things there do jump out at me as possibilities. At the same time, this feels like one of those cards that, although I can kind of see the lines for it, you do have to ask sometimes, just like, is it worth it? And is it consistently hitting a good enough target that it's worth that slot in your deck? You know, this is one of those cards where I, you know, if this were coming off Merlin, I'd be like, oh yeah, dude, this is great. You know, if this was coming off even maybe like a Prowler, like it was a generated card, I can think of a lot of decks and situations where I'd say, oh yeah, this is great to me. But when I have that conversation about putting this in my deck as a collectible skill, I start to ask myself, like, yeah, there's some opportunity cost to overcome here. There's a lot of other good cards I could run, a lot of other good effects and things that I could do. And suddenly this more niche, more kind of inconsistent result doesn't start to look as good to me. I have a lot more questions about how often I think this is going to hit effectively. So I don't know. I feel like this is one of those collectible skills again that's like totally fine, and I'll make a video of it on day 1 and it'll feel reasonably good, but it'll kind of get left at the wayside when we start looking at deck lists. It's like, you know, this isn't really popping up much. It feels okay, but just not great. So then our final card here is Dragon Lord. This is a new 5/5 with on reveal, put a card from your hand here, which, you know, if that's a Fang Foom, boy, this is a very effective 5-cost card. This is going to be a 5/30 or something, cheating out some absolutely monstrously big cards, which I think this is super simple. Cannot believe this card has not been printed this long in Marvel Snap's. Crazy simple effect, but I think sleeper great. I actually think this card has a lot of potential, particularly since we've seen chamber decks come to the forefront recently. These chamber decks just have a lot of big stuff. They want to run a lot of big stuff like a Dragon Lord. He himself is a 5-drop that will often pull a 5-drop down. So it's like, if this goes in your chamber spot, you still got 5-drops there to buff your chamber. That might be overkill, but you get the idea, right? Like, it works really, really nicely with exactly what like chamber ramp decks are looking to do. And the fact that, sometimes you're going to hit a Red Hulk, a Galactus for steps, an Infinite or whatever, makes this kind of nuts. It's like a Jubilee with a higher baseline, but also, like slightly more reliable results as well, because Jubilee, like pulling from the whole deck, you don't have a lot of visibility into your odds, and just often worse odds. Whereas in hand, particularly if you're playing out small stuff early, that means your hand is more and more likely to get loaded up with bigger stuff. Or you could juice those odds with something like a Nick Fury, for instance, in a chamber deck to make sure you have even higher odds to hit something really big and high payoff. So I actually think ramp decks will probably run this. I think there's an equally likely chance they don't, just because there's so many good options, right? But I think if you put this in your ramp deck, it will still feel like a really good deck. I don't think this will hurt the deck at all. It might not necessarily be the like perfect card or in the best, highest win rate lists or whatever, but I think it will be really close to that. And if it's your preference or if it's just a card you have, it'll feel like a really viable option for those kind of decks. So and honestly too, like a lot of those decks, even the low roll hits, like you hit your 3-drop or whatever, you hit a Luna Snow, you hit an Electro or whatever, it's like you still played like 10 power, 11 power, like it's not even that bad. Like the 5 power baseline means hitting a 2 or 3-drop is still a decent 5 cost play. And then, you're willing to sacrifice those moments sometimes because occasionally you're going to hit the 6-drop and just absolutely dominate. So I think this is actually pretty great. I think this is a good card. Now, interestingly, in the data mines, we saw 2 other cards here. I just want to remind you guys, these were not in the new season stuff though. So I don't know if these got cut. I don't know if these were wrongly interpreted as like full cards. Maybe they're just like hero cards for Grand Arena or something, right? Could see both of those possibilities, but as far as we know, these cards we looked at previously, it doesn't look like they're going to be added to the game this month. At least not as like regular collectible cards. So who knows? I don't know. Share your thoughts on that down below. But for now, let's go ahead and rate the rest of these cards from 1 to 4 stars, starting from the best and going to the worst. Shou-Lao the Undying is a 4-star card. Fang Foom is a 4-star card. Lin Lie Iron Fist is a 3-star card. Dragon Lord is a 3-star card. Shang-Chi Master of the Rings is a 3-star card. Lockheed is a 3-star card. Majestic Wingbeat is a 2-star card. And Dragon of the Moon is a 2-star card. Yeah, so there you go. I think 2 like totally stand out 4-star plus cards. I honestly think Lin Lie and maybe even Dragon Lord are close to 4 stars. Don't do like half stars, but they'd be like 3.5 stars basically. And then the rest of the 3s would be like honest 3s, right? I don't even think Dragon of the Moon's like that bad. I think it would maybe almost be like a 2.5-star card despite being the worst card of the month. So I think we got some crazy high highs and a pretty solid base of cards here as well. Like I think the core of this all looks like kind of playable with a couple standouts. I think Shou-Lao looks potentially kind of broken to me. And then Fang Foom too, kind of broken just in a narrower context, but like some obscene numbers are going to come out of this, which I am very excited to see. I love big, crazy numbers. So all in all, share your thoughts on these cards down below. I look forward to playing all these real soon for you guys. So thanks as always for watching, and I guess I will see you around.